Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Camille Aubray to discuss The Godmothers, published by our friends at William Morrow. Camille Aubray's novels, The Godmothers and Cooking for Picasso, were both of People magazine's pick for Best New Books. The Godmothers was also chosen for the Best Books of Summer by Newsweek, BuzzFeed, Parade, and Veranda. Camille is an Edward Albee Foundation Fellowship winner and studied writing with her mentor, Margaret Atwood, at Humber College in Toronto. She was a finalist for the Pushcart Press Editors Book Award and the Eugene O'Neill National Playwrights Conference. To moderate tonight's conversation, we're joined by Alisyn Camerota. Alisyn is a journalist, anchor, author, and the anchor of CNN Newsroom with Alisyn Camerota and Victor Blackwell. She has earned an Emmy Award for her breaking news coverage of the arrest of Roger Stone and the prestigious Edward R. Murrow Award for her breaking news coverage of Hurricane Maria's impact on Puerto Rico. Alisyn's debut novel, Amanda Wakes Up, was selected by National Public Radio as one of the best books of the year and by Oprah Magazine as a must-read. She is currently working on a memoir. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of The Godmothers from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hello.
Hi, thank you for that beautiful introduction. Hi, Camille.
Hello, Alisyn. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I've been really looking forward to talking to you about The Godmothers. As I've said, it was my companion. I just brought it on vacation with me, and it's so fun to have a vacation book to read because then it marks your vacation. Like I've always found that then you're reminded of that vacation when you open that book again. So it's really
right. Yes.
Yeah. So it was great. So let's start at the beginning. Why don't you tell all of our viewers, just give us a little summary of the book.
Oh, well, okay. The Godmothers is about four women who are very different, came from very different backgrounds. Their names are Philomena, who came from Italy to escape World War II. There is Lucy, who came from Ireland and became a nurse. There's Amy, who came from France, and there's Petrina, who was born into the family. She's the only daughter in the family. So the other women marry Petrina's brothers, and they are a family in Greenwich Village in the 1940s. And they have their differences, as sisters-in-law do. They don't always agree on things, but they have to pull together because things happen as we follow the family through the World War II and beyond. And they have to find a way to get together and become this entity that protects the family.
So let's talk about that setting and that time. Why did you choose the 1940s? Why did you choose Greenwich Village? And were these things you already knew about, or did you have to research for the book?
Well, both, of course, but I had worked in New York City because I worked in television. I wrote dialogue and scripts for One Life to Live and some of the other series. So I was knocking around New York for a while.
Exciting. Your credentials are now even more sterling to me. I've a long time viewer of all my children.
Well, okay. So I was doing that. I was teaching in Greenwich Village, also teaching writing. And I was meeting people who remembered what New York was like in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And that intrigued me because the country, New York City, but the country too, went from Great Depression to great prosperity. So it was a very tumultuous time. And I would meet these people. There is something called the National Academy of TV Arts and Sciences. And they would have their lunches and their awards dinners and things at Copacabana in New York. So I would go to these things, and these elder actors and writers and directors would tell me that, did you know what the Copa was?
Hold on, Camille.
Politician.
Hold on, you froze for a second. Hold on. Oh, you're back. Okay, go on.
Well, you might meet a ball player, you might meet a politician, an actress, or you might run into a gangster, they told me. So I said, oh, this is kind of interesting. And that got me going. I love to do research. So I did, the obvious ones of nonfiction and biography. But then I started to get the old newspapers and magazines from that period. And I loved that because I've got all the accounts of the way people spoke then. And, some of the facts were wrong, immediately following certain assassinations or hits or things, but they were very lively. And I would read that. I also looked at the advertisements, for, women's things and, fashion. I liked the music, the movies, I really immersed myself in everything from that time period. I just got really into it.
Camille, I can't see you anymore. And I feel like we should have you, I guess, dial out and dial back in so that everybody can see your animated face.
Okay. I can still see her.
Okay. Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Then you just tell me when
okay.
You can't. Okay. So I won't have her dial out. Oh, hi, you're back. Now I see you.
Okay.
Okay. So you were just telling me about your process. That's very interesting to me. So I'm always interested in how writers do this. In fact, one of my colleagues and friends, Jake Tapper, just wrote sort of the same, like a historical fiction book, I guess. I mean, it's just a fiction book, but there were real characters in it that we all know, Frank Sinatra and people from the Rat Pack.
Right.
I'm interested in that process of where you're combining fictional characters with, you also used real mobsters and interwove it. So in that way, you had to really fasten on, I would imagine, the authenticity of their real dialogue and stuff like that. So why did you want to combine those two?
Well, I liked the idea of bumping into historical figures as opposed to writing from their perspective. I did the same thing with Cooking for Picasso. I didn't write from the perspective of one of Picasso's wives. I wrote about women who sort of, collided with him. In that case, someone who cooked for him, so with the mobsters and, I didn't want to do their wives. I didn't want to do their story, but I wanted to I was thinking about the impact that they would have on people. And if you met one of these people, wouldn't it affect your life? So to me, the trick of it is that you really stay true to that person. You really have researched them enough so that okay, they didn't meet my characters, but what would they do if this situation happened? And if you really get to know them well enough, then you know what they would say and do. And that collision to me is fascinating. That makes history come alive to me. Yet you have the freedom of your own characters.
And I just love their names. Obviously Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, Albert Anastasia, Tommy Three Finger Lucchese, Tony Strollo. So did you do research where you knew they were distinct characters in your mind and their different, characteristics?
Yes, I read biographies on all of them, and I read the accounts, by people talking about them who knew them. And they came to represent, each one represented a different facet of the mob. So, for instance, Lucky Luciano, they said, was head of the commission. He's the one who organized them into the 5 families and really made them like a business, So then you have, on the other end, you have Albert Anastasia, who was the head of Murder, Inc. I mean, that's the hit squad, that's the violence, that's the threat underneath that was their power, But then you have Frank Costello. They called him, the prime minister, they called him, because he had connections to politicians, and he was much more integrated with the rest of New York. He was more of a businessman, Now, Lucchese, there is an episode at the end of the book, which I won't give away, but that, by most of their accounts, that actually happened with him and a certain vehicle that he was in. So, to me, he just sort of represents, maybe the end of an era, actually, as it was ending. And Strollo was the ultimate capo, and his reign, you might say, ended in a kind of a mysterious way as well. So, these guys, they're very lively, they're very colorful, and there are certain things that are touching about them, but they were very self-aware. They knew that they were not going to have a good end by most odds. They knew where their lives were going to end up, and they did not really want that for their sons. So some of that, I think, fed into it,
That's amazing. According to Kirkus Reviews, your book is a, quote, saga reminiscent of Mario Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola, but unlike them, you focus on the challenges particular to women. And I mean, therein is the twist. And that's what is really interesting. Obviously, so many gangster mafia stories are about these colorful male characters, and we've all seen a million of those.
Right.
But I think it's interesting that you wanted to talk about the women who collide with them. And so how did you fasten on that idea?
Well, a really interesting thing happened with that, because I admire The Godfather as the book, and the movie especially was just beautiful. But the women are very shadowy periphery characters, you know, and actually the women characters were a little more prominent in the novel than they were in the film. But in my research, I came across this quote from Mario Puzo, who said that The Godfather was based on his mother, not the men he knew. That every time, he said, every time The Godfather opened his mouth, I heard my mother. I heard her courage, her wisdom, her loyalty, her ruthlessness when necessary, her love of life. And he said, without my mother, The Godfather could not exist. Well, I kind of got goosebumps when I saw that, because I said, well, this, now you go back and look at the film in particular, you know, and you think of everything that comes out of, you know, Mario, the Godfather's mouth, and everything. If you think of that in the context of a wise woman speaking, well, I was kind of off and running at that point, because I said, okay, then, you know, I knew that there were women that needed to speak, and, you know, their story needed to be told. So.
Okay, that's fascinating. I've never heard that backstory of Mario Puzo. I mean, that the real wisdom or whatever, the real action was the godmother. And then, I mean, of course, it just makes perfect sense that you would want to write a whole book, you know, godmothers. And, you know, I'm from an Italian-American family, and godmothers are a big part of the culture, obviously. And, you know, my mother's generation, they were called Kumar.
Yes.
You're Kumar.
Yes.
And it was like I used to hear my mother and my uncle say, like, "Oh, did you get a Kumar gift?" Like that was what you were supposed to bring.
Yes.
And you know, and in The Sopranos, they, you know, they always bastardized, obviously, the even the Italian American language, and they called it Kumar. And I think they meant like their mistress. But anyway, it's just interesting to see.
It did start to, in America, it started to have a strange life of its own. It's true. But you're right. It was very important to families. This was not simply a little symbolic thing to get somebody to be godmother or godfather to your child, especially in the era that I'm talking about, where people died younger than they do now, and infants sometimes died, you know. So if someone asked you to be godmother to their child, they know you well enough to think that, okay, if I died, I know that she will raise the child the way I would want it to be raised. Now, you know, it's a religious thing. So of course the church tells you it should be raised within the church, but mostly it was, you know, someone who was going to take care of that child and had a real sense of responsibility toward that child. So, you know, if you think like a mother has all the responsibility of raising a kid, you know, and the grandmother, you know, she gets to give the kid sweets when the mother may not want to. She's a little on the subversive side, you know, but the godmother is somebody really special who, you know, could give you advice, could come into your life at just the right moment. If you don't know if you should take this job, if you don't know if you should marry this guy, the godmother is someone that you can trust to really be thinking about just you know, what you need. And if you think of what a fairy godmother is in a, you know, fairy tale, there's a magic quality to it, you know. So I thought that these women were in their own way trying to be those godmothers to those children, and that strengthened the bond between them, that they were not just sisters-in-law, but that they were the godparents of, you know, these kids. And so they would say, hey, you know, your daughter, you know, is asking you this, she needs this, you know, and they could talk to each other that way on behalf of the child. So
it's such a great point, because there is that spiritual guide connotation of godmother that other relatives don't have.
Yes.
And I do think that adds a you know, rich layer. So let's talk about these women. So Petrina, Lucy, Philomena, Amy. So what is their relationship, and what are their distinguishing characteristics?
Sure. Well, Petrina, being the one who is in this wealthy family, she's very elegant. The other ones look up to her a lot. She's a little of a fashion plate too. She went to Barnard. She graduated with great honors. She loved studying the arts. So she really would like to embrace the world beyond the family. She doesn't quite know how to take it from there because, there's all these restraints that were on, well, most women, not just the women in her family, but, so she's struggling against that. What do I do with this diploma? And I'm married and I have children. How do I, in those days, it was not, you can have it all, So then you have Philomena, who comes over from Italy, and she kind of makes a connection to Petrina's mother, Tessa, the matriarch, but she's the one who's she's got this magical ability herself with numbers, and she sees people in a way as numbers. So she can see that they need to forge alliances. I think she's the first one that realizes that and, becomes less threatened by it. Now, Lucy, the nurse, I discovered her along the way. She sort of elbowed her way in there, and she was, became more prominent than I expected her to. So she was a joy too to work with. And, she is friends with Amy, who is the French girl. Amy's a little more damaged. Amy's more, vulnerable. And Amy, because she's damaged, it can be a little dangerous at times, So all of them have secrets. And I think that's the key. They all have this baggage come into their lives. They want to move forward with this, wealthy, happy family. They want their children to be happy. But I think it was Philomena in the book who said, a secret starts out as a pebble, but then becomes like a boulder on your heart. And that's what kind of happens as events take their shape in the story, is that the women at first are just bent on protecting that secret and not letting everybody else know because it might be judged, et cetera. But at a certain point, they have to make a decision. Do I keep protecting the secret, or do I trust these other women because I need their help because the secret is now becoming a problem? So, Yes.
A secret is just a great place, I think, to start a book. It's such juicy material. And I was interested to hear that you discovered one of your characters along the way. Tell us about your writing process. Do you have a roadmap in your head when you begin a novel, or do you let it unfold?
I can't believe you said roadmap because, because the image I have when I think about the process is that you're in a car and, you put into your navigation system where you want to end up. Kind of where you want to go, but you don't know how you're exactly going to get there. And so the system gives you a couple of, routes that you could take. And okay, so you pick one and you start out, but maybe there's a road closed that the navigation system doesn't know about. Or maybe the system is telling you, hey, I know where we're going this way, but it might be better to do this because there's traffic, there's unexpected, and you take these twists and turns, but eventually you get there. So I think that that's how it is for me to write a novel. I know where I want to be, and I have that overall scope. And I don't start unless I know the characters and I know, what might happen to them. But there are these events that occur along the way, and you just have to trust at that point your own instincts and follow them. And I think the biggest thing is to be in that scene, in that, around that table with them, or in that room with them, or on the street with them when things happen, and really feel it, and you lose your self-consciousness as, oh, I'm a writer and I'm writing. You don't think about that. You just are in there with them like a fly on the wall, and you know what they feel like. I think the best thing a writer can do is empathize and not judge, and just, she feels this way. Of course, she's going to do that,
That's really interesting to me because I too, you're a writer by trade and by training. I was winging it, writing my novel. But what I would find happens sometimes is that you're so in the scene that it does unfold, and dialogue that you hadn't planned happens. And you're sort of connected to this, it's not exactly out of body, but it's a channel that is an inspiration channel that is different than what you knew you had, and you don't exactly know where it's coming from.
Right.
And that was a fascinating thing for me to discover, that kind of takes over when you're in the moment and you're really engrossed in the scene. And so when you do that, when that happens for you, do you end up throwing out a lot of pages? Like, how far down a detour on your roadmap will you allow yourself to go?
Well, I think, when you're first starting out, you may throw out huge chunks of it. I had, but when I wrote these books, because I was doing short stories and things before that, I already really had a solid sense of where things were going. Because I think when you're doing research, you have to at a certain point stop, and the research, is what's underneath you, and it takes you there. But you don't throw a lot of that in there. What people see in the book is actually just the tip of the iceberg with the research. And then at that point, even though you're making these detours, I don't find myself throwing out a lot at that point, because I find this process really like, I guess it's like anything you do, like skiing or dancing or swimming. And if you're doing it a lot, it becomes very natural, and a strange, nice thing takes over. It's almost like you're not doing it. There's just this force pushing you. So
it is. It's kind of mystical. I mean, I was, again, surprised to discover that the God channel, or the,
Right.
whatever you want to call it, something where you feel like you're not exactly in control. It's
Right.
strange.
It's almost like you're a vessel for this energy, right? That's coming through. I want to hold up the book that Alisyn's talking about. That's the book that her novel. So, and yes, so you know what I'm talking about.
Thank you. That's very nice, Mel. How long did it take you to write The Godmothers?
I would say that once I got actually sitting down starting, that it took about a year and a half. That doesn't count research. Also, the funny scribblings that I do well in advance. I find myself, getting up in the middle of the night sometimes to write something down on Post-its, because if I tell this to people who want to write, and they say, do you have any advice? I say, if you wake up with an idea, write it down, because you think you're going to remember it. You're tired. You don't want to get up, but write it down, because you probably won't remember it. So there's a lot of that going on. And there's a lot of, I don't know, there's sort of with you, the characters, and you're feeling things about it. And, suddenly something hits and you say, oh yes, that's how I can get them there, So all of that goes on before the actual writing,
Oh, that's interesting. So all that goes, okay, that's different than for me. I too, you should see some of my notebooks. When I get an inspiration, or I get a line of dialogue, or I get a word, even a word that I want to use, I write it down on, the back of my notebook, because I know it will be gone. I mean, I know if I don't memorialize it right then, it will be gone.
That's right.
That's what I do. But that's when I'm in the middle of the process. I will write a sentence and then be massaging it. And then sometime, like in the middle of my show, I'll be on the air and the word will occur to me.
Oh, wow.
What the perfect word is. And then I'll just write it down, on my notebook. But that's because it's all percolating, like you say. Yeah. But how is your whole arc percolating before you start?
Well, because the characters are starting to, take shape. It's almost like they're coming into focus, and they may be a little blurry at first, and you sort of get the image of them, but you just, sometimes it'll happen when I'm cooking, just making dinner, and I'm, chopping up carrots or something, and something, wakes up, and I think about Amy, and she's in her restaurant or something, and then they start to come into this much sharper focus. And I know them as if they were people that I knew, and they're not, I don't write autobiographical stuff, but they suddenly become extremely real to me, and I know them, and I know what they would say and do at a certain point, Now, you still have to work while you're doing the writing of it. That year and a half I was talking about, things unfold and develop, and they become sharper even still. And the relationships, I think, are what really grow there between the characters, So.
And do you miss your characters once you're done with the book? Because I found that.
I do. I think about them. A reader told me that when she was reading the Godmothers, as she was getting to the end, she tried to slow down so she wouldn't have to get to the end and close it. And she said, even then, I was still walking around the next day shopping and stuff, and I was thinking about them. So I do that. I do that with people's books that I read. I do that with my own. They're still kind of hanging around.
That's a great compliment. I mean, it's a great compliment if somebody doesn't want your book to end, and wants to slow it down and savor the last pieces. I know that feeling. Okay, so let's talk about the themes that you raised. Food, is integral. And then there are also the themes of money and debt and business and loans. And did you want to make a statement about those? Did you intend to write a book about those themes?
Well, it's funny because, whatever's in the news does come into your life. And that's part of the reason that I like historical fiction, because I like to show that, you are very much a product of the times that you're living in, whether you're aware of it or not, So there were many stories about student debt, for instance, and things like that, But I was a fan of, old classical novels and a lot of the 19th century novels, absolutely, they were not afraid to talk about money and debt. Now, granted, a lot of their characters were sort of, aristocrats who had gambling debts, but debt is debt. And if you owe somebody money and you can't pay it, it's the same situation, no matter who you are. If you look at Madame Bovary or, most of Balzac or Edith Wharton, House of Mirth, all of those pivoted around this problem of, having to pay. Now, you could also be the person on the other end who's owed the money. And, Elena Ferrante, her series of books, that brilliant character and my brilliant friend, Lila, I thought something different was going to happen to her at the time when there was a woman in the neighborhood who was a vicious loan shark, and she was murdered. And when she was murdered, I thought somehow that Lila was going to get a hold of that loan book and, suddenly have that power and control over the neighborhood. So I think that must have filtered in when I had my character Philomena, and I don't want to give away too much, but I mean, she then has the position of having to decide, what do you do when people owe you money and they can't or won't pay, So I just thought that those were interesting things to deal with because, you got people with credit card debt, and everything else. And so I thought that that was something that ought to be addressed as something, a part of life, Now, as for the food and being around the table and everything, I mean, the Godmothers literally have their meetings around that table, but that is a very European tradition, as I'm sure you know, that, especially on a Sunday, the whole family would get around the table and it was a leisurely kind of thing where, you'd have the meal and the children would be there and then the children might go off and play before dessert and the adults would stay and have some wine and maybe nuts or fruit or something and keep talking. And so using the food and that metaphor and that table, I knew that those Godmothers, when the plates were cleared away, would sit down and talk about what they had to talk about that, some people didn't want to talk about, some did, but it had to be addressed, and that creates a sense of community that, knowing that you're going to see someone on Sunday, whether you like it or not, and you're going to have dinner with them. So, you have to reach out,
It's really that's so true. And it creates an intimacy, breaking of bread, together.
Yes.
I mean, that's just a great place to have dialogue and storylines. And so, one of the things that that blew my mind when I was writing my book, because it was such a steep learning curve for me. My book takes place over about the course of like a year and a half, 18 months or 2 years. Yours is over decades. And so when I was writing, I was astounded that at the timeline that I had to keep, I had to actually write a physical timeline and remember what dates things were happening. And also, if I changed something on page 181, I had to go back and change the seeds of it on page 3.
Yes.
And wherever else I planted it. And
that's
so
a good point.
Yeah. Okay. So, but yours is longer. So how did you do that?
Well, let me tell you, at a certain point, I had this cork board and I made sure that I knew what year each character was born, how old they were when they got married, how old they were when they had their first child, and who was older than, the other one, because someone in their 20s is going to say something differently than someone in their 40s, and I wanted to make sure that I kept in my mind, how old they were at various stages. Now, it was helpful because I had a family and I had all these characters. It was very natural to go through those decades because you have the matriarch and the patriarch of the family, Tessa and Johnny. And so they represented the 30s, a very volatile time. And all they wanted to do was, get the family to survive and thrive. Then you get into the 40s and you get into the Godmothers and their husbands. And they, are feeling more of the pressure of the mobsters kind of leaning in on them because the more prosperous you were, the more attention you got, and that's kind of the idea of the evil eye that, you don't necessarily want people to know about your success because they might envy it and want a piece of it, So that's what they were dealing with in the 40s. But when you get to the children and they start to grow up, that now we're into the 50s and the kids want to embrace the bigger world. There's rock and roll, there's things that are luring children out of the house and the kids don't really see the dangers. The Godmothers are trying to guide them around the minefields of life, that the world can be dangerous out there. So because of the generations, it seemed natural to me to be able to cover that time, you know.
But you make such a good point that you needed a cork board. I mean, I can just imagine the tax and the flow charts of people's ages and all of that stuff. I mean, that's a lot, you know, again, 18 months was a lot for me to contend with. So over 3 decades, that's a lot.
Yeah. And then there's the history too. I mean, I have more Post-its on more books and biographies of these characters and stuff than you can imagine. And then I would always say, God, which book did that come from? But I found it, you know. But then you start to take notes. Okay. And I have little coded notes about, you know, where I found this particular anecdote about this particular historical character, because you don't want to lose it. You want to make sure you got it right, you know, before it enters into your book, you know. So you have to go back and look at those things. You can't just, you know, keep them to memory, no matter how good your memory is, because you want to reinforce the idea that, okay, I saw that there, and did I see it in another place? Like a journalist, you want 2 sources, you know. So.
And then what's your process with editing? Do you write the whole thing and then you go back and edit it? Do you work with an editor? How does that work after you have a first draft?
Well, as I'm going along with the draft, you know, maybe first thing in the morning, might look at what I've done the night before, you know, the day before. But I try not to do that too much to get bogged down. I'll tell you one thing that I tell people: I turn off my spell checker and my grammar checker while I'm working, because I do not want to see, okay, a little squiggle, that word was misspelled, and I'll go back and get the spelling right, and then I'll lose my whole train of thought. So, you know, so I'll work along that way. But then when I'm ready to really get into, there's the writing and the editing, and they really are different parts of your brain, I think, you know. So you don't want to be self-conscious when you're writing. But then, you know, you're going to edit, and it helps to have a person in your life that you trust who, you know, knows enough about writing to be able to give you a good opinion. I have a husband, a long-suffering husband, that is usually my first reader, you know, and he'll tell me if he thinks something, you know, isn't working. So, you know, and then I think it's like alchemy. You just keep panning for gold and trying to get rid of what isn't gold, you know. And when you're first writing, you may say something 3 times, you know, and then when you go back to edit, you say, okay, so which was the best way to say it, or is there yet another better way, you know? And that's, to me, the editorial process. But I'm at a point where I start to enjoy that, because I really feel like you're polishing it at that point. At least it exists, you know? Whereas when you're writing, you may have so many balls in the air. I find myself saying sometimes, I just can't die now, because if I die now, this thing will never come together, you know? So I have to do this much before I can die. So.
It's such a good point. Somebody else could edit it if they had to, but you need to write the thing. You need to stay alive to finish the writing of it.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Relate to that.
And then, of course, there's your agent and your editor. That's a whole other story, but, you know, they contribute too. They tell you.
And do they? So you, I mean, how heavy, like once you've gone through it and you've edited it, then you send it to your agent, and do they, I mean.
Yes. Look. They will read it and get back to you with any notes, any questions they have. You know, I'm not sure I understood that, or did he say this, or, you know, or they'll test you out and say, how do you know that, you know, and then you tell them, yes, I have the facts on that, because they'll say, make sure, you know, you're right about that. So that's very helpful. And then when it gets to the point when you're with your editor, my editor was very nice about it. She said, there are some authors that, you know, need a lot of work. And she said, but with Camille, I just wanted to stay out of her way. I'll tell her, you know, she asked me she gave me plenty of notes and questions about this, that, and the other thing, but she knew that leave it to her to fix it if there's something that needs fixing, or give her an idea, but then let her go, you know? So that was really nice. It was a good process with her. That was, I'm lucky.
So I mean, they're basically just giving you notes and fact checking stuff, and that's helpful.
Yes. Or else there's something that they might've, you know, they're not sure that they followed, that, you know, did this happen then? Or, you know, I'm confused about that. Or, so you just clarify things, and you say, well, if I need to clarify for her, I may have to clarify for the readers. So, you know, so that works. That's helpful.
I got a couple of questions from my Instagram followers. I told them that I'd be talking to you. And so they wrote a couple of questions. They said, where do you get the inspiration for your stories? I mean, you've talked a little bit about this, that you just really liked that era.
Yes. Yes.
And is that how it normally begins for you for inspiration?
You know, it comes from different sides. You know, like with Picasso, I was in the south of France, and I was, you know, everywhere you go, he lived in so many places that you see some of his artwork. And I realized that I didn't really know a lot about him. You know, there's the cliches that, you know, So, and there was a museum with this big photograph of him and his eyes staring out. And I felt like he was saying to me, okay, what are you looking for? So then, okay, I felt that I needed to know more than what I knew. The same with the gangsters, there are a lot of cliches, that I wanted to get beyond. But then there are things, I guess it's just in life, I think authors collect a lot of stuff like birds making nests, from here and there, and things you've overheard people saying, especially in New York City. You could be just walking down the street and hear something intriguing, or being in a restaurant, and I did have an Aunt Rose who was a whiz with numbers the way Philomena was. So that kind of factored in, because I remembered her. She could add up these columns, these 3-figure columns of numbers in her head. It was just astonishing. And in those days she could have been a mathematician, but she gave up, for her family to be a homemaker. But I was fascinated by that facility. I think that mathematics is kind of like music. Where does that come from? So that factored in there. And then I guess it's just types of people that you've met. Phrases, the way people speak, it sticks with you. So.
I mean, it sticks with you because you're a writer, but not everybody always gets a pearl of inspiration out of every conversation, but I'm sure that you do. They also wanted to know, what books are you reading right now? Or I have a question before we get there. Do you read while you write? Do you read books while you are writing a novel?
Well, it's kind of difficult because I'm reading so much nonfiction when I'm doing a historical novel, so to read somebody else's novel would be like a real luxury. Sometimes I'll have my husband buy the book for me for Christmas and I may not get to it until July, but I know it's there. It's like, something that I love that I know is there. I read some of the older novels because they're distant and I don't have to worry about not hearing my own voice. Like if I read modern writers, it's a little too contemporary, and so I usually wait till I've finished a book before I read somebody, from our time. But I love reading, I love Colette, for instance, her insights into human nature. And I like reading the books that famous people are not known for. Like Orwell had some really funny earlier novels before 1984, And I think they're just a scream, and I just love them. Same thing with Raymond Chandler, or they have these little gems that people have forgotten about, and I like reading those. That is sort of a rest for me in the writing process.
And are you reading anything right now?
I am just starting to read. Fiona Davis interviewed me for something for my launch for the book. And so I've seen her books around the bookstores and I really wanted to get to them. So I'm just starting with her and Melanie Benjamin. So I'm just getting to know their work. I knew about them, of course. And, our books are on the tables together and everything. And I said, one of these days, I'm going to finally give myself a chance to read these books. So.
That's great.
Course, as I did tell you, I've read your novel. I love it. I thought it was a scream. It was so funny in parts. I was just dying because she just had a funny way of saying things and thinking things.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I too, even I was laughing at times when I wrote it because I did want to peel the curtain back on what goes on during commercial breaks of a, TV newscast in a newsroom. And I figured that viewers and readers would be entertained if they saw what we really talked about during commercial breaks and behind the scenes. So even I was laughing sometimes because those things really are said.
Your book reminded me of a movie was just recently on cable, The China Syndrome with Jane Fonda as the journalist. And I thought of you because I had just started reading your book and I said, there's a connection here about her running around. She smokes a cigarette before she gets on camera. And it was just lovely. So
that's great. There are some universal truths of TV journalists. Yes. Okay, and then the question before I open it up for all the viewers, because I know that they have questions for you as well. And I didn't hate that. It's not true. I didn't hate this question. But I think that one thing, that as soon as you publish a book, the question that people say are, "What are you working on? Are you writing another book?"
Yes. The answer to that is yes. I'm at this point now where I just can't stop myself anyway. So I have 2 books actually. One that I've just finished that takes place in Europe. That is also a historical novel. And then I have another one that I'm doing back in the States again. So I kind of go back and forth. But I have 2 new ones coming down the pike. Yeah.
Okay, writing 2 books simultaneously, that's a whole different skill set.
Not quite simultaneously. It's like when you're cooking and with something simmering on the back burner, and the other one is the one that you're sauteing with, and then you finish that, and then the other one that's been simmering comes forward. So that's how it works for me.
I get that. I understand that. All right. Well, I have more questions for you, but let me just open it up for a second to Christina and see if questions are coming in.
Yes, we have a few. Okay, we've got one for both of you. Alisyn and Camille, what are your writing rituals? Do you need any special pens, tools, snacks, or drinks?
That's a good one. Rituals. Well, let's see. I think it has to do with where I'm sitting. I've got these pillows, they're on this. I have this chair that's supposed to be the way you're supposed to sit at a computer, but I got these pillows and things, so I have to fluff them up, and I've got to kind of get the room ready, and then I sit and do it. So I used to do a lot more longhand, but I don't do that as much anymore. That's more for the note taking at this point.
Okay, well, my story is very different because I have a full-time day job that is demanding.
Yes,
as a CNN anchor, I just write whenever, wherever I can. And it is on a commute. I can write, I mean, not to sound like Dr. Seuss, I can write, on a plane, in a train, in a tree, with a bee. Like, I just write wherever. And even if I have 5 minutes, I pop open my laptop and then write, because I know that my time is so precious. And I very, very, very rarely have a chunk of hours where I can write. And one of my writing mentors, gave me a great piece of writing advice, which was write every day. And I said, he said, write for an hour every day. I was like, I do not have an hour every day. That's not possible. He was like, okay, write for half an hour every day. I was like, I don't have a half an hour every day. Okay, write for 5 minutes a day. Do you have 5 minutes? I was like, yeah. He goes, write for 5 minutes a day. And so that is what I have done. And if you're going to write for 5 minutes a day, you have to have your laptop with you at all times, so that any traffic jam, if I'm at my kids' soccer meet, if I'm anywhere I am in a car waiting, I just pop it open and then write. So I don't have any ritual other than the second I have 5 minutes, I do it.
Yes. When I was starting out, I used to go into people's offices at lunchtime. The people had big offices with a sofa, and I would sit in there and work and do my, writing then, because on lunch, I just take lunch with me and do it, because you have to find the time somehow. And I think what your friend was telling you is, in doing it every day, it's kind of like being a ballet dancer, where you have to do your pliés every day just to stay in shape. You have to keep those muscles working and everything. But it's good, because then you may even dream about it. I mean, I have dreamed things in the book, or you wake up with it. So
I totally agree. Like what I realized, what I learned is, you can't wait until you have time. If you want to write a book, you can't wait until you have time, because you will never have time. And so the write every day is a really valuable bit of advice, because it also, as I said, keeps it percolating. So even if you write for 5 minutes a day, the story is still percolating, the characters are still developing. And I just found that to be really helpful.
It keeps the inspiration in your cells. If you wait, if you put it off and you put it in a notebook, in a drawer, it's not going to have the freshness necessarily that it had when you were excited about it. So that's another reason. Yeah.
I love hearing writers talk about their characters and their process. It's amazing. It's amazing. So rich. So speaking of mentors, someone would like to know what it was like learning from Margaret Atwood.
Oh, that was lovely. That was really, her class was very hard to get into. You had to submit work, and because she kept it small deliberately. So, and so I was thrilled, when she accepted me into it. And she was funny, because I had a short story that the class was going to work on, and she saved mine till the very last. So I had no idea what she thought. And workshops can be pretty tough. Some people will tell you, I just didn't like that character at all, and they'll go into the whole thing. So she waited till the end, and she said to the class, I saved this story because I thought it was a pretty good story. And there was like silence, dead silence. And I was like, oh my God, I had no idea, and then, so she turned the page, and she told me, look out for this, you don't want your prose to get bumpy here, or this or that. But then she said, but the way she introduced it, there were one or two people from the class that came up to me and said, I'm sorry, I didn't really read your, I didn't really, like they thought that, they were going to get in trouble or something by the end of the class. So that was astonishing to me. I almost fainted, so.
What a great feather in your cap. I mean, what a great moment.
But one of the things that I thought was really great about what she said was that she said, you only have what's on the page. You may have a lot of ideas and things in your head, but the reader will only see what's on the page. So you really have to, be able to see, even though you're immersed in your work, you have to see what they're seeing, kind of like a fresh way of looking at it and understand that that's all that's there. And that reminded me of something that ballet dancer Mikhail Baryshnikov said. He said the same thing about the stage. He said that the edges of the stage were as far as you could go, no matter how magical, or big your jumps were. And so you therefore had to know where the edges were. So the page is like the stage. And if you know the boundaries of them, then you can do these big leaps and things because you know where you're going to land, And so I thought that really resonated, that I understood that, the boundaries are not bad things like fences. They are your outer limits, and you have to get acquainted with those. So
what was the story that she thought that she liked so much?
Oh, I had a short story about someone who was doing adoption tourism, going to adopt a child from another country, and her husband was not too crazy about the idea, and the two of them were, just trying to work their way through all these surprises and things, So there were kind of twists there and stuff. Yeah.
It does sound
wow. Good. Margaret Atwood. Whew. She seems so formidable. I mean, like
she is
terrified.
But she is a very, sweet person in there. And one of the things she said that to the class was, "Drink more water." And she meant it. It was everybody laughed, but I know what she meant because when you're really immersed and you forget to eat or drink or something, or she said on tour, drink more water. So. She would give you practical things like that, and she would, give you the writing stuff as well. But I found her very generous and very lovely, and we kept up our relationship so that this is before the pandemic. When she came to town, we would have tea, at the hotel where she was or something, and I just loved, just talking to her about anything, just like little things, not writing, just talking about what was going on in life because we just would have these exchanges that were very nice. So
wonderful. Thank you. So for Camille, do you ever find bits of yourself or life experience in the characters you write about?
Well, I'm sure that my experience of life gets in there, one way or another, someone that you've known, someone's way of speaking, for instance, like the Lucy character, I had a couple of friends that were very, the Irish way of telling stories and things. So I know that must have lodged in there when I was talking, had Lucy talking. And I think they just emerged, through it. But I don't really base the characters on anybody that I know. I'm not sure in the end where they come from. It's kind of mystifying, But I think it's all, I guess what Jung was saying is that there's a collective unconscious too, that we all can tap into, So.
And here's one for Alisyn. Did you see yourself in any of her characters while you were reading the book? That's an interesting one.
That is an interesting one. I saw my relatives. I didn't necessarily, and I haven't finished it, as I told Camille, but I'm, halfway through, and I saw my relatives. I mean, just what I was saying about like with Philomena, and well, interestingly, with Philomena, it begins where they go on a journey. Mm-hmm. She and her mom. Mm-hmm. And it was very similar. Like I imagined that they were in Italy, and I imagined that they were going to Avellino, Italy, because she was explaining that her father's family came from farmers. And yeah. That's what the story was about my father's family from southern Italy, and that they came from farmers. But I didn't know that because when over here in the United States, that wasn't anything that was part of our culture. So I only discovered that later when he was describing to me that they came from Avellino. And I also, there's a town south of Naples called Camerota. And I was like, Dad, don't you think we came from there? Wouldn't that make sense? And he was like, I don't know. My relatives always said that they came from farmland in Avellino. So anyway, there were some evocative moments there with Philomena's journey It was reminding me of my Italian family. And I, and again, with just some of the eating and the Godmothers culture that resonated with me.
I think travel figures in too, because I know the first time that I went to Rome, it was strange because I'd never been there before, but I could just sort of feel, Rome is one of those cities where you can feel the layers of civilization, the people who had been there, and there's still those remnants there, and when I traveled to the south of France, the same thing. And I would see people, Americans, who had come over, and, their eyes were just shining because they would see things that reminded them of their relatives. If you stop for coffee in Rome, and there's those little sandwiches, those little pressed sandwiches, or if
they're the most delicious you've ever had.
Yes.
The most kind of trust them.
Yes. You go into a place and it's a coffee bar, but they're all in the case there, and one is more beautiful than the other, and they put it in the little press thing, and and you have that with your coffee, and you're standing there, and there's these people standing there, and I ordered one that had some milk foam in it, and the guy behind the bar said, "Chocolato?" And I was like, my husband said that my eyes were wide because I never thought of in the morning, putting some chocolate on the white foam the way he did. And that was new to me then, so there are things but there may be things that remind you of a grandfather, those like very dry cookies that they dip into either wine or coffee, because that's why they were made that way. And you don't really think about it until you see it. It's a bit like Proust, with the Madeleine.
Yeah, I think the word that Alisyn used, evocative, is a great one. So someone would like to know, will there be an adaptation to film or TV? And who do you envision playing each of the Godmothers?
Oh, that's a great question. I have been thinking about opening that up to my readers and saying, tell me, because I may not be up on all, the younger characters, or somebody new that I haven't heard of yet, because I thought Marisa Tomei, for instance, ought to fit in there somewhere. I thought that I saw her in, I think it was The King of Staten Island. She was wonderful. So, so I think of that. And we have been discussing, I have an agent in LA who has been talking about, the possibility of doing it possibly as a scripted series so that we don't lose a lot of the story, so that we can do it, it's more like chapters, or at least sections, you can get to everything. Whereas in a film, you really have to compress it more. So, yeah. So I'm open to any suggestions from anybody about who they think should play any of the four Godmothers. I think that would be fun.
That's a great idea, just to ask your fans, ask your readers, who do you see in these roles?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, I want to thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you for this evening. Thank you, Alisyn, for your moderating.
It's my pleasure. It has been my pleasure to talk to Camille. Thank you, Camille. Great to meet you and talk to you and hear about your inspiration.
Thank you so much.
Really entertaining.
It's nice to see everybody. We've been communicating with emails, and now it's nice to really be almost in a room together.
It is. It is. I certainly hope that it'll be in person someday soon. I hope. You have an open invitation to come to Miami and Miami Book Fair whenever you like.
Oh, I would love that. Before the pandemic, I had been doing events in restaurants, and the chefs would prepare a menu based on the food in the books.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So I want to do that. The people have been saying to me, as soon as we're able to, let's do that for the Godmothers too, because people would sit down, eat the food in the book, have a copy of the book.
That is a great idea. We do a lot of
that. We are doing that.
We have a beautiful courtyard in our Coral Gables store.
Oh, perfect.
We used to do these farm to table dinners, but Chef Alan Susser, so we're going to get him to do that at some point. Definitely.
Great. Let's all do it. That would be wonderful.
So thank you to everyone watching from everywhere. I just want to remind you, if you don't already have a copy of The Godmothers, you can order it from us. Just press the green button. We'll ship it right out to you. If you're in Miami and you want to come by one of our stores, we have copies there as well. And thank you so much. And keep doing what you do so well. And stay safe.
What a pleasure. It's, when you write a novel, it's like a message in a bottle. So it's nice to know that somebody's on the other end who got the bottle.
Yep. We're here. Okay. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
So talking to you.